With the release of Deltarune Chapters 3 and 4, my hyperfixation has fully resurfaced, controlling every single aspect of my life. I can't go an hour without talking about every moment in the game that made me go, Epic Poggers mode! And when a special interest sticks around too long, the only way I can healthily deal with it is to transform it into another one of my special interests. That being tabletop gaming, in this instance, competitive card games. Hi, I'm Kaydio. I'm the lead developer of Railgrind, the racing card game, which is pretty neat and you should go check it out, but this video isn't about that. It's about this one, Deltarune Cards in the Dark. How I transformed Deltarune into a card game, the struggles I encountered, and how you can join in and help. So how do you turn Deltarune into a card game anyway? I had to figure out which direction I'd actually like to take the game in, and there's a lot of different ways that you can go. I could try to recreate the battle system and incorporate some sort of bullet hell mechanic, but that would require positioning on a grid or something, and I'm not really feeling that. Instead, I decided to go a little bit more evocative of Deltarune itself. In this game, we're going to justify it as a little game that Rouse makes for Chris and Susie to play with the various recruits in a pacifist or neutral run acting as the cards. Consider it a little card shop zone that exists in Castletown. We can also have the areas they've visited as a way to reminisce on their journey thus far, and now we already have two different card types, Darkners and Locations. With that, we now have a core identity, so it's time to think of a set of mechanics that can tie everything together. I decided to take a little bit of inspiration from Hearthstone, Pokemon, Warhammer, and you're not going to believe this one, the My Little Pony collectible card game. Now, hear me out, it actually has some pretty interesting gameplay. In that game, you build a secondary deck of problems that get dealt out to the center of play. You then move your units to those problems to meet the listed requirements, and your opponent can use Troublemaker cards to try and stop you from doing that. For our game, we're not going to have any difference between Troublemakers and units, so we're just going to combine them all into one creature type and call it your Darkners. Additionally, I don't really like the idea of having colors or factions in this game, so we're going to make the problem cards, called quests in this system, a list of shared mini-decks that you get to pick from when the game starts. These two decks will get shuffled together and then dealt out to the center of the board in 3 different lanes. There's no requirements to collect these quests, so instead we're going to handle that through combat. Let's have a zone called your Fountain where you can play your Darkners. Players will then distribute their Darkners to these quests to try and collect those cards, with the highest number of power points between all those Darkners winning. And the first 1 to 4 quest cards wins. There we go. Now, the next thing that we need is interaction. The simplest way to do that in most card games is through some sort of combat system. So let's go ahead and introduce a wrench into collecting. Combat will be dealt with by totaling your available Darkness power stats. You might notice that all of our cards also have a soul number. This isn't HP, but rather the soul value that we'll put on every single card. When you try to collect a quest, you reveal the top card of your deck and add its soul value, and then discard its card. That's called a soul check. It'll add just a little bit of risk and variety to the combat that we're going to need, since we only have one single power stat between all the Darkners. If your power total is higher, you collect the card and all Darkners move back to their fountains. If you don't, everything stays where they are and any unused Darkners will then fight, dealing damage to each other in the process. Alright, now that we have a win condition set up and a baseline mechanic, let's start exploring everything else. We can implement tension points as a mechanic and use it to represent the resource needed to play cards. Let's say you get 5 per turn to play anything, and we'll add in one-time use cards as act abilities, and sure, why not some item cards that don't act as Darkners but stay on the field as well. Now it's time to actually get the game set up. I made a quick spreadsheet that determined the values of every card, and right now, balance does not matter, especially when you're just starting out and making a card game. You have to make sure that the game actually works first. So I'll have a couple characters that move around a bunch, and let's make a deck that cares about cards with no abilities. Now I have less work to do. With that set up, I spent an entire all-nighter using the assets from the console version's backgrounds and the UI to make some quick frames, and it's off to the playtest mines. My first game was against my pal Tailsweet. You should go check them out too. And it was pretty fun. The foundation is definitely solid, but there were a ton of gaps in design that I hadn't accounted for. For example, what happens when the combat power ties when you try to collect a quest? It was surprisingly common. Another thing I had was a trap setting mechanic, where you could pay 2 TP to play an act card face down, and unlock the ability to flip it over in response to other things. But spending so much TP to do that made it so that it was barely ever worth it, and I decided to instead just hard limit the number of cards that you could set instead. Another issue I had was everybody confusing the soul for being hit points. That makes sense considering it's a heart logo, but I mean, come on, I need the heart to be somewhere on the cards, it's iconic. I tried moving it, stressing that it was on every card type, including ones that didn't even make sense to have HP, but nothing was working. So I added a label to all the stats, so everybody could tell what exactly they are. Hopefully that'll clear it up. Tail also brought up the issue with soul checks versus consistency. If you're going to be discarding cards as part of combat, it makes sense to have a lot more copies of those cards, so you'll at least be more likely to use them. Most of my games have a 3-copy limit, but I decided to bump that up to 4 for this game. With these tweaks, the game moves by a lot more smoothly, but there's still a ton of minor tweaks to make. I only have about 40% of Chapter 1 and 2's NPC cards at this point, which is a shame. I don't even have a rules card yet. I have some ideas on how to flesh out these various archetypes, but for number tweaking and balance, I'm going to need you. If you want to check out this game for yourself, the links are in the description, and if you need somebody to play with, I am always around. You can join the Station Square Studios Discord, where I host various games of Railgrind, Deltarune, and more. Thank you so much for watching.